It's time to make some Spanish donuts. Hi, Chef Mary here from the Way Cool Cooking School, and today we are going to show you guys how to make some churros, otherwise known as Spanish or Mexican donuts. Fun fact, churros are often served as a breakfast food, and the original churros were like the size of a breadstick. We're going to make a little bit smaller version here in our kitchen to go along with our Mexican fiesta cooking kit this week. But I wanted to show you a little bit about the stuff that goes into making churros and how to make them safely in your home to get started with. In your kit, you have a container of flour, a container of sugar that we are going to measure out for not only this recipe, but it's going to be used in several other recipes, some cinnamon and sugar, a piping bag, some chocolate chips to make a ganache dipping sauce with later, and a small container of salt, and then your own bottle of vegetable oil. We here at the Way Cool Cooking School have a big bottle, but we gave you your very own bottle of vegetable oil to use for the recipes in this kit this week as well. As we finalize our meal and make dessert for our Mexican fiesta, this is one of the recipes where it's very, very important if you are cooking this with and for your family that you have a grown-up nearby, because we are going to be using the stove and we're going to be using hot oil for this recipe. So do not do this one alone. Make sure that you have a grown-up in the kitchen with you when you're doing this. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to get our kitchen set up ready to make churros. And so I've got 2 pans here on the stove. My stove is not on right now. I've got a large, deep, tall pan that this is what we're going to do the frying in. I'm going to put some vegetable oil in there. And then I also have a soup sauce pot, and this is what we're going to actually be making our churro dough in. This churro dough is a very kind of cool technique where you actually heat the liquids up on the stove and then you make a dough with those ingredients. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to add some vegetable oil to our pan that we're going to fry our churros in, and I'm going to fill it up till it is at least a 1/2 inch thick in that pan, and that's going to give those churros enough room to kind of dance around in. If you have a Fry Daddy or a deep fryer at home, you can also always use that as well if you're more comfortable with that, and fry them inside of that too. The other thing our recipe calls for is it does actually call for 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil for our actual dough mixture, and that's going to help bind everything together. And so I'm going to do that right away. I'm going to add my 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, and I'm going to add that right into my 1 cup of water to add into the pot. And so I've got my pre-measured cup of water here, our 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil. I'm going to add that into the pot with our pre-measured 1/2 teaspoon of kosher sea salt. And then we also are going to measure out 2.5 tablespoons of sugar from our sugar pouch. And our sugar pouch is used in multiple different recipes. And so I'm going to make sure that I just measure out what I need and add in that 2.5 tablespoons, which is 2 full tablespoons, and then it's actually 1.5 teaspoons. So 1.5 teaspoons equals 1/2 tablespoon. So we're going to add that in. And then we are also going to add in our flour here in just a moment. But the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that this oven or the stove is turned on, and we're going to bring that liquid up to a boil. And what that's going to do is it's going to dissolve the sugar and the salt in the mixture. And so I've got my heat-safe silicone spatula here that I'm going to use for multiple different things in this project. And we're going to heat this water up, and we're going to allow the sugar to dissolve in the water and the salt to dissolve in the water as well. And then when that is all done, we're going to take and we're going to stir in this flour mixture so that it becomes a dough for us to use to put into our piping bag and pipe into our churros. Okay, our water is boiling here with our sugar and our salt mixture. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our whole pouch of pre-measured flour, stir that into that liquid, and get that stirring. I'm going to turn the heat down to medium-low. And what this is going to do is it's going to form a dough ball around my spatula as I'm stirring. And you can actually at this point take and we're going to remove it actually off of the heat and keep. Okay, we are stirring and combining our dough here in our mixing bowl, and we're stirring, and so it's going to come together kind of like a big ball of Play-Doh around our spatula. And we're going to take this and I'm going to keep stirring this up, and we really want to make sure that we incorporate all of the flour into that mixture. And I'm going to let it work around my pan a little bit. Again, our stove, I just turned that burner, so it is on low, And so we can get all of that flour mixed in and cooked in there. And I'm just gonna stir it around here. And I'm gonna turn that off completely. And so when we're finished, you have a big ball of churro batter dough. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna carefully add that into the inside of the piping bag while it's still warm so that I can take and put it in there. Now, friends, this is very, very warm, hot dough. Please be careful when you add this to your piping bag because we do not want any burnt fingers. So we've got that there. And while I'm waiting for that to cool down just a little bit so we can take and we can pipe it into our oil and make our churros, I'm gonna talk a little bit about our chocolate dipping sauce. So I've got my chocolate chips here and I'm gonna add in the heavy cream. And what we're gonna do with this is we're just going to microwave it 30 seconds at a time in our microwave and then stir it. And then after about a minute, it only takes about 2 30-second intervals, we have chocolate dipping sauce for our fresh churros as well. So we're gonna get that going. And then once this is cool enough that I can handle it in my hands a little bit easier, we're gonna take and we're gonna fry up those churros in our hot oil. So I'm gonna make sure that that oil is hot enough as well. After 30 seconds in the microwave, it only took the one time this round, and I am stirring in that warm heavy cream into our chocolate mixture. I'm using the same measuring cup that I used for my water and my oil earlier for this churro project. And you're just gonna take and you're gonna stir it until that chocolate ganache that you created is really, really nice and smooth. So that takes a couple little whisks here, and I'm just using a regular tablespoon here from the kitchen. And you can see it's starting to get drippy and wonderful. And so we're just gonna set this off to the side, and we're gonna use that as our dipping sauce for our churros. You can, if it gets a little bit too hard again, you can always take and add a little bit of extra cream to it and reheat it for like another probably 15 seconds. You don't want to heat it for that full 30 because if chocolate gets too hot in the microwave, it'll stay dry and it won't come back together as the ganache. So you want to be really careful with the temperature with that. Our oil is still heating up, and I've now got my bag so it's cool enough that I can touch it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take and we are going to cut off the end of this so that we can pipe our churros directly over the oil. And then cut them with our kitchen scissors as we are frying those too. So it's always better to cut off too little from the end and have to cut more than to cut too much off. And so I'm gonna start by just cutting an inch or so off of the churro bag. And that is probably halfway up of the blue indicated area on the piping bags that we have here, or if you're gonna measure, it's about an inch that we cut off the end. And then I'm gonna take and I'm just gonna start to kind of use my fingers here. And it's still warm, but it's definitely not hot. I'm not gonna burn my hands here. And I'm gonna make sure that it pipes out at the end of the piping bag, and it does. So that is ready to go. Our chocolate dipping sauce is ready to go. You also received, and we have a pre-made cinnamon and sugar for you. This is what we're gonna use to roll our churros in after they come out of the oil. So we're gonna place our churros onto a paper towel lined plate so that they have somewhere to drain and somewhere to kind of dry off a little bit. And then we're gonna toss them in some delicious cinnamon and sugar for our churro dessert treat. Okay, our oil is hot enough. It is at 375. The way I can test that is obviously if you have a candy thermometer in your kitchen that you could use to temp it, you can certainly do that. Or what I've done is I've just taken a little bit of our dough off the end of our piping bag. I let it drop into the hot oil and I popped it in, and it is definitely rolling around in there and bouncing around and getting nice and golden brown. I have my plate ready to go with my paper towel, so there's some place to drain, and I have them very close to each other, so I'm not running across the kitchen with a very hot churro. I have a pair of tongs to safely take the churro out of the hot oil. And again, remember, this is something you definitely want to do with a grown-up in your kitchen. Some helpful hints when you're frying things is always, although it's kind of scary, you don't ever want to drop anything from way too high up in your kitchen, because if you drop it up, it'll splash. So as we're piping these churros out of this bag, we're gonna actually kind of drop them almost right over the oil and get that going. So I'm gonna grab my piping bag here. I'm gonna take, and I'm gonna just start to squeeze this very, very carefully here with 2 hands over the top of the oil gently, and it's just kind of falling into the oil. These I'm making about, I would say like probably 7 or 8 inches long here. And then I'm gonna take my kitchen scissors and I'm just gonna snip the dough, and it's gonna fall into the oil. I would do maybe 1 or 2 at a time so you can make sure that you have enough space and that every time you drop something into that oil, the oil cools down. And so by just doing them in smaller batches, you make sure that your oil stays hot enough for them to actually fry and not just soak up all of that vegetable oil. And it doesn't take very long here. We're gonna kind of move it around a little bit. And when I start to see it kind of turn colors, I'm gonna take and I'm gonna rotate it and flip it over here carefully with my tongs so that we can get both sides completely golden brown and cook. You are actually cooking the proteins inside of the flour and inside of that churro batter. And so you do wanna make sure that it cooks long enough in your pan for that to happen. And we're gonna take, and it's just starting to turn golden brown here on the edges. So I'm gonna take and I'm gonna flip that churro over here. And the bubbles are coming away from the surface of the churro as it is in the hot oil. And that is telling me that the oil is definitely hot enough that we are frying it. We're not just submerging it into hot oil for it to kind of poach or sit into. And so we definitely want that air bubble to happen. I've also taken and I've dumped out my cinnamon sugar into this nice big baking dish, or you can use a shallow another plate, or a pie pan would work really, really well too. I just wanted something bigger than my churro so that I can take and I can kind of shake it around in the cinnamon sugar while the churro is still warm and cooking. All right, I'm gonna check on our churro friend here again. I've got our little tester that's wanting to be attached here. So our first piece that came out our tester is really, really nice and golden brown. And so it's just like this little tiny little baby donut here. And we're gonna take and I'm just gonna get that out of our way. And it doesn't take very much time. Here, I would say we're probably at about 2 minutes on each side for it to fry up. And we're getting to the point here where it's almost completely golden brown too, so we can show you. We're gonna take and we're gonna dab off the extra oil onto our paper towel, and then we're gonna toss it into our cinnamon sugar while it's still warm for our churro. Okay, here we go. Oh, that looks really, really good. So again, they're a Mexican donut, and so we want them to kind of look like donut color. And I'm just gonna take it, it's still sizzling. Ooh, that looks good. We're gonna take and I'm gonna toss that while it's still warm in the cinnamon and sugar. And again, I'm using the tongs because this is still really, really hot. And then we are gonna continue that process doing 1 or 2 churros. You wanna do that with all of your churros. Get them in the cinnamon and sugar, dry them off a little bit, and then dip them into your delicious chocolate ganache. Or what I like to do too, if it's still warm enough, is I kind of just like to drizzle it on top of the churro and eat it kind of like a glazed donut. So those are how you make churros at home in your very, very own kitchen. Another thing is, as your oil gets hotter and hotter, you may need to adjust the temperature a little bit on your oil so that it doesn't go too far above that 375 frying temperature. You can always adjust and go up or down with that on your stove too. This is delicious. Oh, I can't resist. All right, here we go. Cheers to our churros. That's a good donut. Thank you so much for cooking with us today. And as always, oh, it's so good. You can find this and there's so many other fun cooking recipes at waycoolcookingschool.com. We've got classes, we've got kits. Really, we just love cooking with you. So thank you so much for watching. Olé.